Have you ever been in a conversation where you can tell the other person isn't listening? It happens all the time. We all need to grow in our listening skills, especially when it comes to faith-based conversations.
Jesus had this teaching. He'd often say, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear." Jesus can actually teach us how to listen to him and to others so that people become curious about who he is. Ears to Speak is about inspiring spiritual curiosity through listening.
We're your hosts, Maddison
And Jessica Leapfick. Maddison, you mentioned to me recently that you feel like the phrase broken is becoming pretty commonplace in Christianity these days. So where have you seen that? Because it feels like it's coming up a lot, like, I'm really broken. And
Yeah, I think in the Christian world, so to speak, Christian culture, we're as a whole trying to get away from using what are called Christianese words or like churchy words.
Yeah.
And so in our attempt to change our language, we're starting to replace churchy words with like halfway churchy words, in my opinion.
Sure.
Or what happens is we replace those words and then people are like, oh yeah, that's a good word to use instead. And then it just
becomes normalized.
Yes.
Right.
Repeated enough that it is now coined by Christians. So it's Christian, falls under Christianese. And I think that broken is one of them that we use to describe our state as humans. Like, I'm a broken person, but I am redeemed and I have a story to tell, even though I'm broken.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm broken, but I'm bold in the brokenness.
Yeah.
And so it's so hard because semantics are, it's a reality that
the language
semantics
you use
changes everything.
Yeah. And you're not going to hear someone walking around saying, I'm a sinner.
I'm a sinner. It's cool though.
Like,
I'm saved.
I feel like back in the 80s when I was growing up, it was like sinner saved by grace. You know, like you would see a t-shirt with something like that.
Phrase.
Like, or the Christian t-shirt with 4 nails forgiven or something like that. 4 nails equal 1 God equal forgiven or something like that. So people aren't talking about I'm a sinner saved by grace these days.
No.
At least in normal everyday conversation. But they would feel comfortable saying I'm broken.
And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying you shouldn't say that or there's something wrong with it. I just am very sensitive when it comes to language because I want people, when they talk to me, to feel like they can relate and to feel like they know what I'm talking about. So if I'm talking to my non-Christian friend and I'm like, I'm broken, they're like, what do you mean?
What the crap is wrong with you?
Like, you broke your toe? you broke a record?
Yeah. You got a chipped tooth?
Yeah. So just continuing to look at our language and the words that we're using and, for lack of a better way of describing it, like update the words that you're using so that you can better relate to people.
Yeah. And I've read this on other blogs and other authors writing things like, most people don't want to be described as broken. Like, I'm a broken person. Or, you know.
Yeah, it seems negative.
You even see things that like, I'm a hot mess or things like that, which, you know, sometimes it's true. Like, it's okay. But I think, like you said, if we start overusing them or trying to use them to replace other words that we're not comfortable using anymore, like sin, then it just becomes kind of synonymous, like broken equals sinner.
And I think that it loses its meaning. You know what I mean? Like when you're on the phone with someone, like let's say you're on the phone with your mom or your husband, and at the end of the phone call, you're like, love you, bye. It's like, does that I love you really mean anything?
It loses the potency.
Yes. And I think that's the same with when we use these words over and over and over again. It becomes this thing that we just hear and we don't really think about. It's just, it loses its meaning.
Yeah. And I think especially when it comes to relating to people who are outside the Christian faith, thinking about what are the words that are going to connect with them, that are going to be meaningful and potent to them is really important. So today we are going to talk about what does it look like to be bold in the midst of your brokenness, or to be a good listener and hear people and connect over life's struggles or life's challenges. And we want to be mindful that the words that we use can connect with people or push people away. So we're going to just talk about some of our experiences of what that's been like, of listening to people, but also sharing ourselves, even when we don't feel entirely competent or comfortable, just putting ourselves out there to say, you know what, I may not feel 100% confident or great or happy, but Jesus is still good and I can still connect with others no matter what. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. You told me a story recently, Madison, that I'd love for you to share, that you were, I mean, you're kind of mindful all the time of trying to connect with people, just in general, whether you know their faith background or not. So tell me about this interaction that you had of like listening and trying to connect with somebody.
Yes, it's a very embarrassing story for me.
Way to go. Way to be bold.
Way to be bold in sharing about your embarrassing stories.
Broken but bold.
I just really hope it entertains everybody else. Well, I think for me, I connect really well, and this is probably true for most people. We connect well when we share hard things.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to feel super connected if we're talking about nails. Even though we do have good stories about going to nail salons, but we're not going to feel like, oh, we're so tight now.
You're my sister.
Like, I know so much about you based on the nail color of your choice.
Right.
Even though that's a fun thing to know.
Yeah. Conversely, I would say, too, like if somebody starts with their strengths and how awesome they are, it can feel really alienating. So there's a woman in my life that talks all about the stuff that she buys, the exotic trips that she's going on, her successful work. And to me, I feel like, well, I can't relate to that. Like,
I have nothing to contribute to this conversation.
You know, like, one, I don't have any similar experiences. Two, our values are very different. Three, this just makes me feel like crap because maybe I'm struggling at work or can't afford to go on those exotic vacations or have people tell me how awesome I am or I'm not well connected.
Right. And most of the time you're just sitting there trying to figure out how to best respond.
Right.
When you can't relate in that situation. And not to say that we always in conversation need to be like, oh, this is going on in my life and it always has to be sad. But I think that we really can connect with each other over the struggles because on a day-to-day basis, what a lot of us are thinking about is how can this situation in my life get better?
Yeah.
How can my future be better than my present? And that's reality. So I always feel closer with people when I connect with them over my struggles and their struggles.
Yeah.
And then we feel closer.
Yeah, totally.
And that's how relationships can build. So you were asking me about a story that I had shared with you earlier.
Yeah.
So currently, my husband and I are fostering my 7-year-old sister, Mia. And Mia is the most friendly kid I've ever witnessed. So it doesn't matter where we are. We're out at the grocery store. We are at Target, whatever.
At a park, she's like, hey, everybody.
She's like, hey, will you be my friend? To anyone who looks somewhat close to her age. Yeah. She just loves making friends. And it's very sweet. I love it. Most of the time, I just love watching the kids' reactions because a lot of kids are like, you're weird. Why did you just ask me to be your friend? You don't know me. But it's really cool when kids are like, yeah, I'll be your friend. And then they run off and play.
I know. It's adorable.
And I'm like, wow, adults could really learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
So this one night, we were at Chick-fil-A. Me and my husband, Mia, and our baby.
Yeah.
And, of course, Mia sees these 2 little girls who are her age, and she's like, will you be my friend? And these little girls are like, yeah, you want to go play in the play place?
Yeah.
And I was like, yes.
You can like eat your nuggets in peace.
Yeah. So these 2 little girls were accompanied by this woman who I just assumed was their mom.
Yeah.
And so our kids go off, and they're playing in the little play place in Chick-fil-A. We're waiting on our food. And of course, the girls come running out, and Mia's like, can we eat together?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, sure. So we go outside, because it's nice out, and it's freezing in Chick-fil-A. And the woman is like, Mia can come sit at our table and eat with us. So here Mia is. She just made these new friends. Yeah. She's sitting at this table with these 2 little girls and their mom. And we're all just eating. So the girls scarf down their food as fast as possible, obviously, because they want to go back in and play. So they run off, and it's just me and my husband, baby, and this mom. So naturally, we start talking to her, and throughout the conversation, I learned that she adopted one of those girls. So one of those girls is her adoptive daughter, and the other girl is just her friend from school. Yeah. So we start talking, and so now we have this common ground, right?
Right,
so
you're fostering your sister. Yeah. She's adopted a child.
Yeah.
We've got some common ground there.
We have some common ground. They're about the same age.
Yeah.
And I feel like at this point in the conversation, it's appropriate for me to ask, so what happened with her parents? You know, why did they give her up? And the woman says, I'm not telling you that. That's not my story. That's not my story to tell.
Wow.
And I was really taken back because usually when I ask people these deep questions, they respond well because I'm a warm person, you know, and
you're not jumping in right off the gun like, hey, I ordered a spicy chicken sandwich too. And by the way, how did you end up adopting your child?
Yeah. Tell me something deep about your life.
Right. Yeah. You're trying to get a feel for the kind of conversation they want to have and trying to be sensitive, but she was not ready to have that
She
conversation.
wasn't ready. And that's not a personal attack on me. You know, I felt like at this point in the conversation, we had built up enough rapport and I had built up enough trust with her that maybe it would be okay to ask that question.
Yeah.
And I love hearing people's stories.
And honestly, a lot of adopted parents are used to telling that story and are willing to tell that story because it's a pretty big part of their lives. Like, it's a life-changing experience.
Absolutely. But for her, it wasn't something she felt like she had the right to share, which I do respect that.
Yeah.
And I respect that she was so bold to just say that to me.
Yeah.
So while I'm sitting there taken aback, my pride is hurt, obviously, because, you don't want to connect with me anymore on that
Sure, it can
topic.
feel really sensitive. I mean,
yes.
really,
and it did.
like, it is personal.
And I knew my husband felt awkward.
He's like, I'm getting some more fries here.
Because he has to put up with me in public talking to strangers as it is. And
you're
so
just like Mia, basically. You want to make a friend everywhere you go and like make a meaningful connection.
That is so true. And he's like me waiting to see how the other kid is going to respond to me. You know what I mean? Like, that's so funny. But anyway, in my response to her pushing back, I just said, I'm sorry. And I respect that.
Yeah.
Like, I respect that, you know, and then I said, I guess I wouldn't really want to share with you about my mom and why we're in the situation we're in at this point. And
how did she respond to that? What you did was just kind of pause, apologize, because clearly she felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But then you came back and still tried to find common ground of, I would feel uncomfortable with that too. Like, you put yourself in her shoes to say.
And affirmed her for pushing back.
Yeah.
She just said, like, I don't feel like I can share that. So she just kind of reiterated what she had said before. And then we moved on from the conversation. So me being the person who I hate awkward situations and uncomfortable situations,
most people do.
I'm going to try to find a way out. So I just asked her another question referencing what we were talking about before. So I think that there was a lot to be learned in that conversation, you know. That could have gone a lot of different ways. I could have just felt really awkward and shut down, and maybe we would have just gone back to eating and not said anything at all.
How do you think it could have played out? Because I feel like a lot of us encounter things like that where we're in a conversation, things seem to be going okay, and then something happens where you just feel like, whoa, this took an awkward turn.
Where
and
do
there's
I go
a
from
number
here?
of things that can happen in that scenario.
Yeah.
So like, you just shared how it did play out, but how else do you think that plays out in your life or in the lives of other people? Like, what are the options when we encounter those things that are awkward, where we encounter brokenness or something just different that we feel like, I don't quite know how to deal with this?
I think that we could have just stared off and kept eating.
Right.
And maybe it would have just been like an awkward silence for a while.
Yeah.
I think she could have responded and maybe tried backpedaling because my lack of response could have made her feel bad.
Oh,
you know, and she could have been like, I'm
really sorry. Like, I just like to keep things private. And no offense, but, you know, like, blah, 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 blah.
Gotten really defensive.
Sure.
We could have just, like, left the conversation and she could have walked away feeling like, who knows, like terrible. Or we ended up at the end of our conversation actually swapping information. I got her phone number because she's like, maybe we can get the girls together for another play date. And she actually has a podcast.
No way.
And I told her about ours. And so we both looked each other's podcasts up. So she could be listening to this right now.
Hey, shout out.
And just to say, like, I'm sorry again that I asked you that really forward question.
But see, what I love about you saying that is what happened wasn't enough to end the conversation. You did exchange information. You did say, let's hang out again in the future. And I think that's a great example of, even if we stumble into areas of awkwardness or brokenness, it doesn't mean the conversation has to end. We can still find ways to connect with people and move forward, whether it's them asking something in our lives that we feel awkward or uncomfortable or scared to share, or us doing the same thing for them. Like, it doesn't have to end the conversation. And and really, that does take boldness to say, like, I will keep moving forward even if things got a little awkward. So
yeah, and I think that right now in our culture, I mean, we all disagree about something, especially with everything being out there on social media with politics and politics. Like, we all disagree.
Sure.
You can find someone you disagree with anytime you log
Yeah.
on Facebook. And if we allow those disagreements or those discomforts to stop the relationship,
Yeah.
we're going to miss out, or we're going to lose an opportunity to grow by just facing our pride and trying to repair what was damaged.
Yeah, but it's easy to want to do that. Like, I was at a social event the other night where I'd been having a really nice conversation with this couple and had met her husband for the first time, and he started talking to another guest at the event, and they started jumping into politics, and very quickly it became evident to me that the things that they were expressing were very different from my views, that were personally offensive to me,
Right.
which felt very awkward. And so for me, I'm like, the stuff that you're affirming I see as real areas of brokenness and mess in this world, but we were just having a nice conversation about something, and I'm not about to jump in and say, hey, actually, I think really differently about this, and the way that you're talking about things is offensive to me.
So what did you do?
I just had to get up and walk away.
Okay, that's good.
I just had to get
Sometimes
up and
you
walk
do.
away because I felt it was one of those things, like, as we're talking about being bold in brokenness, that sometimes what you're trying to gauge is somebody's openness and receptivity towards sharing about deeper things. And this woman kind of said to you, like, I'm not ready to share about that. But you were able to continue the conversation. From everything that I was able to gauge from the conversation these guys were having, it was very clear to me by their body language, by the tone of their voice, by the things that they were talking about, they were not interested in having a learning conversation.
Okay, that's good.
You know, it was a very, like, let's argue about the things we both agree about. And
Yeah, let's get hyphy together about the things that we agree on.
yeah, my husband always says, like, it's really fun arguing with people who agree with you, because you just, you know,
Right.
you get all amped up and you're like, yeah.
Oh, me
like,
and my husband do that all the time.
yeah.
Yes, I get
So
it.
we get up in arms about stuff. So for me, I felt like I would add brokenness to that situation by jumping in to say, I don't agree with this. This is offensive. It would have broken a relationship that hadn't even really begun if I had done that. And so for me, the best thing was just to walk away and say, okay.
You continue on in your conversation.
The bold thing for me to do, even though everything inside me is wanting to say, that's wrong. Have you considered this perspective? I disagree with you. The
Right.
things you're saying are hurtful, bigoted, insensitive, whatever. My bold move was to say, no, like, I'm not going to engage in that.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk away. And sometimes I think you just have to do that, one, for your own health and mental health, but also realizing, like, is what you're going to try and get in a conversation about going to further the relationship or harm the relationship, even if you're never going to see that person again, you know?
Yeah, and what you're saying is use wisdom.
Right.
And I just want to highlight a few things that you brought up through telling that story, and that's there's a time and a place for everything. There's a time and a place for that conversation. You chose to use your wisdom that wasn't a time and place for you to jump in and add fuel to that fire.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that you want to notice the cues.
Yes.
So that's what we want to communicate to our audience today. You want to notice, like, tone of voice. You want to notice body language.
Yep.
You want to notice the way that when you're in conversation with someone, are they nodding their head at you?
Are they making eye contact?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or are they, like, checking their phone? Are they looking at their watch? I don't know if people look at their watches anymore, but the time on their phone.
Are they looking off in the distance when you ask something maybe a little more personal? That gives you cues to say, okay, I've stumbled into an area that might be uncomfortable or painful for them. I can make a different choice to say, okay, I'm not going to go there.
Right. And you can just stop talking about whatever it was that made them uncomfortable and maybe ask them a different question to change the subject. So the other thing that we wanted to talk about in this episode is how when we are vulnerable and we share about the struggles in our lives, it helps people to then open up to us.
Sure.
So share a story about how you've done that in your life, or maybe even a common struggle that you share with people that you feel like really connects with them.
Yeah. I think for me, I mean, I've struggled with depression for most of my life. So that actually has been a real point of connection with a lot of women specifically because, a ton of women struggle with depression. And so to be able to talk to them and say, yeah, I have a hard time with that too. Like, it was hard to get out of bed this morning. It was hard to find the motivation to brush my teeth. That's not how it is for me now. But in the past, I have had points in my life where it's been like that. So for me to bring it up and share kind of vulnerably this area of pain or challenge in my life gives people permission the same to do that in the conversation. But I think even beyond that, like where you find that common ground through sharing challenge or brokenness, but then there's that moment where you can transition the conversation to something that brings hope, that brings encouragement, that brings affirmation of it can be different. And so I think in your conversation, your bold, it can be different moment is, I'm still going to keep talking to you and still want to pursue a relationship with you, even though we had an uncomfortable moment. The bigger thing to me is the relationship and not just that you offended me or made me feel uncomfortable. I think for me, one, sharing vulnerably about depression, but also saying like, here are ways that God has helped me to kind of find my way through it. And whether that's been through medication, through exercise, or spending time with friends, it's been scary for me at times to tell people, I forced myself today to make a meal for somebody else to go and serve them because I know that part of overcoming depression is going and serving others. And so sometimes it is, I'm going to do the thing that feels so counterintuitive and make that bold choice because I know that I'm part of something bigger and the reward is greater than staying in the challenge. So, for me, that's been a big one of like getting outside of myself and serving others when I am feeling depressed and remembering like everyone's going through something and I can still serve even if I feel like a mess, and I can still extend love and compassion to others even if I'm having a rough day. So
yeah, and sharing about depression is a big deal. I mean, that is a struggle that a lot of people have that seems very dark and seems very lonely.
Yeah.
And so we might have someone listening right now who's thinking, I could absolutely never share about my depression. Like, how can you sit here and tell me that I should just go out and tell someone about that simply to relate with them?
Or you've had really painful experiences where you have shared and someone's like, well, you just don't have enough faith, or just journal or pray.
I pray that hasn't happened to people who are listening, but I'm sure it has.
If you are listening, let me just say, I'm sorry. That's painful.
Yeah, so for those of you who feel like sharing something that deep and that has that much of a hold on your life, don't. Share what's comfortable for you to share with someone else. And that could be like, I had a really rough day at work yesterday, because everybody has rough days at work. Yeah, and everybody can
share vulnerably enough for people to relate, but you don't have to give your whole life story. So, yeah. So besides kind of paying attention in conversations to nonverbals, vocal cues, things like that, what else would you encourage people of being vulnerable about the challenges and struggles in their lives to connect with other people so that they could find connection to Jesus, to others, to community, and ultimately see like the love of God in you through pursuing relationship, even if you feel broken, if you feel uncomfortable, if you feel like, who am I to say anything? Who am I to reach out to somebody else?
I think that besides it being a great way to relate to somebody, it also helps us, and I know I've said this before, get outside of ourselves. Yeah. And it helps us to not focus so much on our own problems. Yeah. And when we share vulnerably with someone else and then they share vulnerably with us, then we both realize we're not alone in our problems, and we've just created an open space for this to happen again. Yeah, absolutely. And we've just created a lot of trust. Yeah. And we are safe people for each other now. Yeah. And that is huge. Yeah. That is a huge bridge builder and friendship builder for you to be that person for somebody. Yep. And we had an episode recently about asking good questions. And keep that at the forefront when you're in those conversations. If you're sharing about your depression with someone and they're sitting or nodding their head, or they're saying things like, yeah, I get it. Yeah. Then stop and be like, do you want to tell me about that?
Tell me more. Like, what's that been like for you?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So using good questions is so important.
Yeah, really that is kind of the bold thing, to keep the conversations going instead of shutting down. If you feel scared to be vulnerable, or if things have gotten a little uncomfortable. So, well, we hope these stories and tips have helped you today, because there's just so much brokenness in our world and in our lives, and we can feel paralyzed of not knowing what to do, when we scroll through social media or hear stories from our friends. But there is something we can do. We can listen, we can pray, we can be present, and just be there for people. So we hope it's encouraged you today to just see God can give you boldness despite what you're going through.
Thank you for listening to Ears to Speak today. If you liked what you heard, please go and subscribe to our podcast, review it, share it with a friend, and we would love it.
Show us some love. And if you want to get in contact with us, if you have any questions about the show, just want to drop us an encouraging note or
a critical note.
We receive those too. We also receive cookies. You can send us an email at connections@stonecroft.org. If you want to find out more resources about how to share your faith, you can go to stonecroft.org and check that out as well. Thank you so much for listening today, and we're looking forward to connecting with you again.